Jimmy Corsetti is the face of the modern Atlantis debate revival, and he's done a lot of exhaustive research. But is he wrong? Why doesn't anyone else reference Atlantis? For a civilization that was one of the most sophisticated and advanced in the history of humanity, why is Plato the only one who talks about it? Now, you've probably seen Jimmy's great videos or him as a guest with Joe Rogan, and this is the Eye of the Sahara. It's in Mauritania, West Africa. It's so massive you can see it from space. This is where Corsetti thinks Atlantis was located. The Rishat structure, as it's formally called, is a geological formation that occurs when a lava dome collapses, leaving a sort of deflated volcano look. That helps create the ringed effect. It's not an impact crater as many people have thought. Now, it's about 30 miles across and 100 million years old, but some rocks at the side and erosion could push it back to almost 2 billion years old. For Corsetti and others, it's home to the lost city of Atlantis based on his exhaustive and highly compelling research. He points out the rings from the volcano match Plato's description of the concentric ring city, with huge mountain ranges to the north. That's the present-day Atlas Mountains. Adding to Jimmy Corsetti's theory, which borrows from the expertise of Randall Carlson, evidence of a massive and violent torrent of salty ocean water washing across, wiping everything clean like a wet mop, and then taking Atlantis out to sea. These wavy grooves in the sand seem to indicate the torrents of water flowing just like what you'd see at the beach from the tide washing over sand. There's also salt along the surface in many areas, including huge deposits and apparent seashells inside the top of an extinct nearby volcano, according to Corsetti. Now, he and others say that is proof of the mythical Great Flood that most cultures and religions talk about, and it obliterated the city inside the Eye of the Sahara. It's possible the city was built upon the existing volcanic rings, borrowing from nature's design to lay the iconic foundation if it was there. There are no ancient structures inside the Eye of the Sahara. There is evidence of nomadic farmers that have lived there, but nothing to indicate evidence of a city like Atlantis. But this isn't where Plato said Atlantis was supposed to be. He said it was much farther to the north. Sort of. Just over 20 years ago, archaeologist Manuel Rosa claimed to have found Atlantis in a marshy area in a national park in south coastal Spain. Now, he based the claim on satellite images he said showed evidence of a sunken ring city and a network of canals matching Plato's description of Atlantis. Computer renderings were made to support his theory. Now, critics of his work said he was simply looking at natural formations, and there is evidence of possible structures that may have sunken or have been covered by the marshland at one point, but no major excavations have ever taken place in the eco-sensitive area. And besides, once again, the location, while much closer to Plato's description, because it is so close to the Straits of Gibraltar, it's still not quite right. The most important Greek philosopher, Hesiod, was the first known person in ancient Greece to reference the god Atlas, and that was back in the 8th century BCE. This is what it looks like in ancient Greek. Now, Atlas was a god whose traits and mythology has roots in older Etruscan and Sumerian culture, and it was at this time that the Atlas Mountains, an imposing and majestic wall that lines the top of North Africa, dividing it between the Mediterranean and the Sahara, first appeared in ancient Greek texts and navigation tools, and the name likely borrowing from the idea of the mighty god Atlas, in this case the mountains holding up the sky. Now, the name Atlas doesn't really have any roots in ancient Greek. Linguists have argued that the root of the word Atlas in ancient Greek is very common for a Proto-Indo-European language that predates ancient Greece. And the name Atlas, it may have also been co-opted from the local indigenous North African Berber culture that had a very similar name for the Atlas Mountains. And the thought is perhaps the two were put together. So by the time that Plato referenced Atlantis in his works, some 400 years later, after Hesiod, the name was rooted in one of the most important gods in Greek mythology. And that had likely been borrowed from the Berber culture, and this is where the most important and likely overlooked piece of history lies. The Berber culture is one of the oldest in the world. They have lived in North Africa for at least 10,000 years, since the Neolithic period, long before the Arabs, Greeks, or Romans arrived. Nowhere in ancient Berber culture is there a legend or reference to a giant technologically advanced city or civilization in the middle of West Africa, and they have a very rich, detailed origin story. Now, Jimmy Corsetti cites this composite map created by Conrad Miller in the late Victorian era from works by ancient Rome's first known geographer, allegedly showing Atlantis in West Africa. But this is a map from the 1500s that was printed, created from a copy of the same map by that same Roman geographer, and it doesn't mention Atlantis anywhere. It does mention Atlanticus, but only in reference to the ocean. I took Latin in high school. I didn't do very well. But everything I've read on this map, I cannot find any reference to the word Atlantis. This is the oldest known medieval map of the world from the 13th century. It doesn't reference Atlantis. Chinese explorers have been sailing the world for thousands of years, and there are no known historical accounts in ancient Chinese texts or maps of a city or culture like Atlantis. Now, it's also worth noting at the time that Conrad Miller made that map, the Atlantis myth was undergoing a pop culture revival in the 19th century thanks to people making erroneous links between the newly discovered Mayan and Aztec cultures and the mythology of Atlantis, including the worlds being created by popular authors like Jules Verne, whose fantasy novels were helping fuel the myth of Atlantis. Both Greek and Roman philosophers have spoken about other cities being destroyed by great floods, but none reference Atlantis in name or in similar description to what Plato had written. It's likely they are about the Minoan culture in ancient Crete that was destroyed by a volcanic cataclysm. It's also worth noting Plato was clear that Atlantis was a continent that was destroyed and it lay beyond Gibraltar. So if it was in West Africa, there would be a better reference point in order for people to find it in his writings. So why would Plato be so detailed with his description of Atlantis, yet be so ambiguous, bordering on misleading, for its location? Well, likely because it never existed, or if it did, it has long been swallowed by the violent plate tectonics beneath the Atlantic Ocean. Something could have been erased by the shifting continental ridgeline where the two tectonic plates meet in the middle of the Atlantic, but we'd never know anyways. We do know Plato meant to use his story as an allegory and cautionary tale for society, greed, arrogance, and loss of one's connection to the world that they no longer live in balance with. And you know, great stories will always stand the test of time, long after people remember if they're true or not, just like Atlantis. I'm Sean. Thanks for watching. If you like the content, be sure to give it a like and subscribe. I've got great new material coming all the time. There are some helpful links in the description below, and be sure to share your thoughts and your comments. I want to know what you think about this. Stay tuned. There's another great video coming up next.